Welcome everybody, Chef Katie May here. We are live for another episode of Delicious Living. Happy Valentine's Day. In just a couple weeks we're making a sweet treat, super nourishing, super tasty, but this one won't get you hooked like most of the highly processed candies and sweets and baked goods on the market. So this is a way to treat yourself and really indulge without going over the top and staying aligned with what you want to be nourishing your body with, all the foods that just treat our body and our mind so well that we feel good after eating these. So even these baked goods, this little treat we're going to make, you're going to feel good after these. So welcome everyone. The name of what we're making, I had called originally fudge or raspberry chocolate cupcakes, but I think the cupcake name is just a little bit misleading because of the texture. We're putting them into little cupcake containers, but the textures is different than a typical cupcake, not by a whole lot, but that tends to happen when we're doing our whole food plant-based cooking without the oil, sugar, salt, egg, and we're even using just a little bit of almond flour, so very little flour today, and it totally changes the dynamics with baked goods, right? So if anyone's done plant-based cooking, baking before, you know what I'm talking about. And I just released a dessert cookbook, my revised dessert cookbook, and so if you've started experimenting with those, let me know in the comments if you had any successes, anything you really love, or just the desserts that I've done over the last 10 years. So these are a yummy treat. I'm really excited about these. So let's get started. We have the secret ingredient here. We're going to put everything into not everything, we're going to put a couple ingredients into our blender to make sure that they're nice and creamy for us. But this could be done in a food processor. I just found that the blender makes things even more, just more creamy. So you're not getting the grittiness because the food processor doesn't completely blend everything. And either way, I do recommend that you soak your dates ahead of time. So I have 16 deglet dates here, or 8 medjool dates, and we're going to add the soak water. They're soaking in half a cup of water. And if you guys are on my email list, you got the recipe just a little bit to go before the class started. If you're not on the email list, then definitely get on it. And the best way to do that is, Meryl, if you could give them the featured recipe link so that they can get our featured recipe today, then I'll send that to you right away. And it's a PDF file, so you can easily save it to your computer and print it out. So our soaked dates in here, and then 2 cups of black beans. Okay, 2 cups of cooked black beans. Now this is the secret ingredient. Instead of flour, black beans are going to be the base. And this makes for an extra nourishing, extra nutritious baked good, but it also keeps the baked good from getting too dry. And it doesn't rise as much as you would see with flour. Okay, we're going to add a little bit of flour in a minute, but the black beans are going to be the base here. And then along with the beans, I'm going to add my vanilla, and I'm only adding the vanilla now instead of with the dry ingredients, because if I was using vanilla extract, I'd want to add the liquid to the wet ingredients, okay? So just to be consistent, I was actually using vanilla powder though. Vanilla powder or extract will work. And next up I have my jam here. So this is the second key feature ingredient. This is a raspberry jam with no sugar added. So I'm just going to scoop out a little bit. We have, actually we're going to do 6 tablespoons, and that is a 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons, okay? 6 tablespoons of this jam. Now this, like I said, is a raspberry jam, no sugar added. It's sweetened with fruit juice. So 100% fruit, no processed refined sugar. Obviously this is minimally processed, but no white sugar added, no agave or high fructose corn syrup or anything like that. So it's much more nutritious, and we're giving a little extra flavor to our brownies, a little fruit flavor to the brownies by adding it to this mixture. So this is my extra 2 tablespoons. And we're gonna put some into our frosting as well. And if you wanted to, you could do, I would, rather than buy a store-bought jam, which has sugar in it, which you could do, if you can, make your own homemade jam. If that's the only options you have, is the fresh jam or the jam with sugar added to it, I would make your own. Okay, and that is really easy to do on the stovetop. You can just heat the raspberries on the stovetop and blend them down or reduce them down. And raspberries, strawberries, any berry will actually work here. You can do any of your choice, but raspberries with chocolate, amazing flavor. So now we have all of our wet ingredients, the beans, the dates, soap water, and the raspberry jam here. We're going to blend this up, and we're going to use a tamper. Make sure we have our tamper so that we can help to move everything around and get it going easily. Let's see. So it'll take a minute, and you want to stop in between so that you don't over process or burn out your blender here. Okay. Let it stop, cool for just a minute, and then we can start it again. So we should have really creamy base to start with. Awesome. And let me see, let me grab a big spatula. This is actually thin, narrow spatula, but longer. So this is going to work out well with our Vitamix here. Any questions? And let me know in the comments, and I will see what I can get to. We're just going to pour our wet batter into the bowl here. Actually, if you want to mix your dry ingredients first and then pour this batter right into those, that would work as well. Or we'll mix the dry ingredients in a separate bowl and then pour that in here. Okay, let's see. Janet, you can leave the beans out and do flour instead. Do a more of a typical brownie mixture. And I don't have exact proportions of what that would be, but if you want to look up, an easy option to do this without the beans would be to find another plant-based, oil-free, right? Oil-free, vegan, ideally plant-based, whole food plant-based recipe, and replace something like applesauce, a fruit sweetener, a moist ingredient that they have in that recipe, with the raspberry jam. Okay, you just replace the apple. A lot of times they use applesauce as like an egg replacement, oil replacement, and so replace the applesauce with your raspberry jam, and make sure you add the cacao, of course, and then you can. Oh, I have one more other secret ingredient here. We're just going to pour it into the wet ingredients here. And so if you are using the other recipe, you want to do this as well. This is beet juice. This is fresh beet juice. If you don't have beet juice, you can use the cook water if you steam some beets, and the cook water at the bottom of the pan is just infused with some of that beet. You can use that because it'll have a red tint, but the beet juice is going to be much more powerful. And I'm just going to use about a teaspoon here of beet juice right into my bean mixture, and this just helps to give us even more of a pretty, it's more purple than red or pink, a purple color here. Okay, and then we have, like I said, we're going to do our dry ingredients in a separate bowl here. So in this bowl, we would do our flour. So this is almond flour, and it's a little bit fatty. So if you were to, if you want to do a different flour, you could do oat flour, rice flour. But my go-to, if you don't want to do almond flour, would actually be coconut flour because it's also fatty. If you don't want to do a high-fat flour like the almond or coconut, and you do rice or oats, just know that the brownie mixture is going to be a little bit more dry because it doesn't have the fat content. And if you are doing that for just accessibility reasons and you don't mind the extra fat, you could add a little bit of like an almond butter or something to give you a little bit more fat. And then we also have some flaxseed. Flax helps to gelatinize, well, it does gelatinize everything and helps us with binding all of these flours because it's all gluten-free here, right? So the flax will help with that. And then a little bit of baking powder. This just helps give us a little bit of lift. We'll mix this all together. Now, I am not a baker. I definitely have some delicious recipes for plant-based baking, but I say that I'm not a baker because it really takes quite some experimentation to really refine your baked recipes. And I am more of a food addict. I have a tendency to overeat and over snack and taste while I'm making baked goods even. So if anyone wants to do more recipe testing and actually developing, where you're not just testing but you're tweaking and experimenting and really optimizing some recipes for me, I'd love to work with you on that. Kind of just a volunteer position, but then you get to eat everything. That would be fun to work with someone on that. But for me personally, I'd rather have savory. I'd rather have all the delicious savoriness because I feel better doing that than overeating on plant-based desserts and everything. That being said, I do love sweets. And so once you've got a recipe that's good, it's so nice to just be able to make that and really enjoy it. And so I think you guys are going to love this one, and it's a fantastic way to stay on track with what you want. Renee, I answered your questions about the almond flour, I think. So let's see. You said all the wet ingredients. Yeah, so the beet juice, Justina, you saw we added that. The King's Child, what's the issue with copying the recipes? I'm just curious, maybe I can help you out there. And you can do this, we're doing this in, we're gonna make these in the little mini cupcake trays, but if you want to, you could put this into a baking dish, like a brownie pan. But if you're going to do that, I would recommend just an 8x8 pan because we don't have very much batter here and it gets really thick, so it's not going to spread out evenly. If you think you have a 9x13 and you'll just spread it more evenly, that's not going to work well, okay? Let me just tell you, because you'll see in a minute, this is a pretty thick batter. All right. And let's actually, because it's so thick, it's better to mix this with a fork. I have one here. Let me see any. So Oh my gosh, it smells so good. It smells like brownies. All you need is a little bit of that cacao, I guess, for that brownie smell. And I've got some already out of the oven, so you guys don't have to wait for me to bake these. We've got a magic oven today. I'm just gonna pull them out. You know, I think my dates had a good soaking. This batter is actually a little bit thinner than the last batch I made, so that's good. It's not, there's no, I guess it's not, I'm saying it's good, but it's not bad or good either way. It's just is what it is. So it's close to what I had before, but it's actually a little bit thinner, which is just makes it more convenient, I should say, more for spreading and everything. So this is that batter, right? And you see it is still thick, but I'm saying it's a little bit thinner than the last batch I made, so you can imagine this just a little bit thicker, and it works really well for scooping into using a little ice cream scoop and just putting it, you line your cupcake tray with all the little cupcake holders, and then you can scoop this right into your cupcake holder. Just a little bit, like one scoop, right? And then put those all in your, well, they would have already been in the tray. And how they come out, let me show you. Here, fresh out of the oven. So you've got these little balls. They're almost like truffles, except they're baked. And they're so delicious. So you could make these more with the batter. If it's moist enough, you can just kind of spoon these in and it will turn out a little bit more like cupcakes if you don't use the ice cream scooper. But when it's really thick, it helps so much to have the ice cream scooper rather than trying to use a spoon to portion all those out. Next we have our frosting we're gonna make. So the frosting, I have a blender here, mini blender. This is the Personal Tri-Best blender here. You could do this in a Vitamix, a high-powered blender, and it would actually be easier because the nuts, they'll get creamier in a high-powered blender than they will here. But I do have them soaking. They've been soaking for an hour now, so that should help with the creaminess. I'm going to just strain out the extra water here. Ideally, whenever you use nuts, strain out the water and then use any fresh water if you need more water added to the recipe. We'll just put these in our little blender here, and then we're going to add in our secret ingredient again, our featured ingredient, the jam here. So again, our raspberry jam, but you could use strawberry if you wanted to. And we're going to do 4 tablespoons. I doubled this recipe from my original one. So 4 tablespoons. And this is an alternative to dates. Typically when we make a frosting, we add creaminess via the nuts or seeds, and then we add some sweetness, often with dates or different dried fruit. But here, this is our sweetener, okay? And it works out well because you use almost a whole jar between the brownie mixture and the frosting. Let me see, any questions? The King's Child, and I'm not familiar with Copy Me, that software program, it sounds like, so I can't give any advice there. Justina, I just missed it. The beet juice added to the wet ingredients. That's the only reason I didn't add it then. You can use beet powder, but I'm not sure how much kind of punch the redness comes from, how much redness comes from beet powder versus just the beet juice. It doesn't seem like quite as much, but it probably still has some impact. So if you want to use beet powder instead, we're definitely not using it for the flavor, but beet powder is great to have on hand. Beet juice, they're both very healthy and actually boosting to your immune system. They deliver more oxygen to all of your organs, so they kind of give you a boost, and it will work hand in hand with all of the cacao in this recipe. Peggy, yes, I mentioned you can do it in a baking pan. 8 by 8 would work well. Yes, the cocoa powder, I don't personally, I just mentioned all the cacao powder here, but I actually can't handle too much cacao powder, so I only put in 6 tablespoons. If you want to, you can do more than that. Of course, you can do more cacao powder, and the best, I recommend doing a raw cacao powder rather than like a roasted Dutch cocoa powder, something like that, for more nutrition and a little better flavor actually. If you want to do a different nut than cashews, macadamia nut would work well. It's definitely more expensive though. We're going to add a little beet juice here as well. Macadamia nuts would be much more expensive, but oh my god, amazing flavor. And other than that, hemp seeds or sunflower seeds would be an option. I would definitely go hemp over sunflower because the flavor would be better. But if you want to do almond butter, you could do that. The flavor wouldn't be bad flavor, but it wouldn't give you the white color, and we're blending this so that white color doesn't matter. It'll just turn out a little bit darker if you use almond butter. You could use fresh almonds or almond butter, half the amount if you're using almond butter to fresh almonds instead. Or walnuts would be fantastic. Walnut, if you can, if you're looking to optimize the flavor, roasting the walnuts first and then adding them so you don't have quite as much of the bitter tannins from the walnuts. But yeah, you guys have lots of options, so you can experiment with this, right? And when we add the raspberry jam and the beet juice, this gives us a prettier color. So the color isn't as important as like it would be with most like vanilla frostings, right? You know what? I'm actually going to put this into our other blender here. Let's just rinse it really quick. Because there's enough in here that it will work, and it'll give us a creamier frosting. So, transfer that. If we baked these in regular size brownie pan, what would the cooking time be? The recipe says actually the different cooking times, and I would go with in the oven in these little tiny mini cupcake holders. The cooking time is, I would check it at 20 minutes. You could let it go a little bit longer depending on your oven, and at 20 minutes, it starts to crack on the top a little bit, which is kind of a sign that it's done, but it will still be a little bit moist on this inside. But if you're going in a casserole pan or baking dish, go longer, like 30 minutes to 35 minutes, okay? And again, it depends on your consistency that you like. I'd rather pull them out with a little bit more moisture on the inside, so they're a little more fudge-like, and then you can always reheat them later on. If you pull them out where they're really dry, and that's how you like them dry, you can't really reheat them. So just consider that. All right, so let's blend this up. I'm gonna add a bit more of the beet juice here. And that has a strong flavor, so I'm also gonna add a little bit more of this juice. And this is just to help make this a little bit more moist, so it's easier to blend here. All right, my lid. And we'll use the tamper again as well. Smells like beets and raspberry. And you'll have to be the judge when you make your frosting about the thickness and how much, if you need to add a little bit of extra water to get it blended and everything, you just want to be careful that you don't make it too thin so that you can still spread it. Now if you want to, you can see that thickness here. If you want to, you can put this into like a piping bag and squeeze a little bit onto each one. That would be really pretty. I don't have one of those here. So we're just going to we'll use this little spoon just to scoop them onto our delights, I guess, instead of cupcakes, delights. And yeah, a little bit thicker. Would be nice, but oh my gosh, the flavor of this is so delicious. I won't do all of them right now, but let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments as well. Look at this pretty color. Isn't it so pretty? It's like a pinkish purple. And then we'll top these off with fresh fruit. So that's my favorite dessert. My favorite dessert is fresh fruit. My favorite local in-season fruits. And adding the fresh fruit to baked goods like this, when you have a concentrated baked good or concentrated plant-based desserts, it's so nice to balance this concentration here. And it's definitely more dry than our fresh food. So you just top these off with a little bit of raspberry on top. Well, if you can, put the top of the raspberry down so it'll help stay a little bit more. It'll be pretty. Let me see if I missed questions. Yes, and in the dessert cookbook, actually, kind of the base for what I started this recipe with was the minty fudge brownies. In my dessert cookbook, I have mint. I just love mint and chocolate together. So I have minty fudge brownies, and they're so amazing. So if you haven't gotten the cookbook yet, the dessert cookbook, it's available on the site. If you go to theculinarygym.com and click on the cookbooks link in the top menu bar, then you'll see an option for all 4 of my cookbooks. That's the only way to get them right now. All 4, which is the dessert cookbook, which has over 60 recipes. Potato cookbook, all recipes with potato and sweet potato. And then Mexican and Italian. And those, I think there's 150 recipes. So definitely check those out. And again, you guys know my style unless you're just joining me for the first time, but we use the freshest, most nutritious ingredients, whole plant foods, and then we turn them into a whole bunch of delicious, scrumptious dishes. So that's my style, starting with the whole foods, no oil, no sugar, no salt even. You can sprinkle the salt on top because it's not needed in the food, and you just generally end up with too much, and that salt adds to water weight and all this inflammation. So just check that out. Check out the cookbooks too, and lots of free recipes on the site. I think we have over 300 free recipes on the site, but the cookbooks are nice because you can easily download them. The brand of raspberry jam I have here, great question, Bonnie. This is Saint Delfour. Delfour, I think it's French, D-A-L-F-O-U-R, and this is my favorite jam to buy. I found a couple other brands over the last decade of sugar-free, 100% fruit sweetened jams, but this is the only one that's been reliable. I can find it at almost every health food store, Whole Foods Market, Delfour, Saint Delfour, and they have all different flavors. Really, really a nice brand. Yes, and I recommend definitely, Trina, get a mini cupcake pan and cupcake trays as well, because I have like I have cheesecake recipes, and I have a chocolate cake and a carrot cake recipe, and they're always more, I feel like, more delightful when they're made into either mini cupcakes or just cupcakes, because they're more bite-sized and you can have just a little bit rather than having a whole bunch, and then they're easy to freeze too if you wanted to freeze any, and share them with other people, pass them around. In case of a nut allergy, what would you use instead of the almond flour? I mentioned earlier you could use the coconut flour, or if you wanted to do almond, I would do oat flour before doing rice flour. Rice flour is very dry. Almond flour, a replacement would be oat flour if you want to do a grain instead. And the oat flour, it's just going to be a little bit drier, and it kind of gets cakey too. But that's where this is not, these are not intended to be cupcakes where they're really light and moist. They're great the way they are. So I'm sure the oat flour would work fantastic as well. And larger cupcakes would take longer to cook. So I mentioned getting the larger cupcakes container, and that was more for if you're doing my cake, like a chocolate cake recipe or the carrot cake recipe, where it is intended to be a full cake. Then it would work in a standard cupcake size. This recipe, it could go into a standard cupcake size, but you wouldn't want to fill the whole cupcake of a standard cupcake pan because it's too moist, it's too dense, and it won't cook all the way through. I haven't experimented with it, but I'm just letting you know based on what I've seen with if you do a casserole pan, it ends up, you want it pretty thin, and it ends up being delicious, but it's thin. If you put these into a larger cupcake, you'll end up, having a taller batter, a taller dessert, and it may not be dry enough afterwards, after cooking. If you do try that, you might want to lower the heat to 300 degrees and then just cook it for longer. Yes, Karen, you could use black beans instead of home-cooked beans. I made a big batch of beans this morning, actually in the Instant Pot, and I use those, but you can do canned beans, absolutely. You just want to do, this recipe is written for 2 cups of cooked beans, and if you do 1 can, that's only 1.5 cups. So you'd have to do 2 cans. How do you make beet juice that's more concentrated? I didn't make it more concentrated. I just put beets through the juicer, and I made a whole bunch of juice for me to have tomorrow morning, because if you're juicing beets, it's messy, and to make it worth it, I got a full 16-ounce jar of juice for tomorrow morning. And by the way, I love beet juice, especially in the morning because of that high from the nitric oxide and extra oxygen. Yeah, if you guys like what you see here, these little cupcakes, if you want to give them a try, please give me a thumbs up and follow along. Subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell so you get notifications when we go live every Thursday. That would be great. And if you want to share this recipe as well, pass it along. That really helps our movement, the plant-based movement, and helps me here at the Culinary Gym. Yeah, a little less black beans would be fine. Just take into consideration the consistency of the batter. You might want to add a little bit extra flour if you do less beans. But really, we're all experimenting when we do plant-based cooking or plant-based baking without all of these extra ingredients. So as long as you're open to experimenting, definitely have some fun with it and make the recipes work for your personal needs and taste preferences. You don't need to refrigerate them. They can sit on the countertop for a couple days without refrigeration. I'll pull one out here for you. It's definitely like a little truffle except baked. So cute. And we'll break it open so you can see. Now that it's cooled, it looks dry in the middle, kind of fudge-like, but when it's first out of the oven, it'll look dry on the outside, but if you give them a little tap on the top, you can tell that it's a little bit moist on the inside. So that's why I say to let them cool a little bit before frosting and enjoying. But I should try one for you too. Let's give you my thoughts. Yummy. So the recipe, I'm calling it Fudge Delights because it is more fudgy. Like I was saying with the beans, it just gives it a fudgier texture than typical brownie or cupcakes. Okay, and the jam, if you're curious about the jam flavor in the brownies, it's not strong. It's very light. So if you want more flavor, you can up that amount. But remember, again, with the consistency, you'd be affecting the moisture content. But you could add more raspberry, and it would be even more raspberry fruity flavor. Is the screen fuzzy? I can't check it, but I apologize if it happens to be fuzzy. The chef is fuzzy. Well, that's great to know so late in the game. Sorry about that. Definitely, and get on the email list like Meryl was saying. If you opt into the featured recipe, Meryl, if you could share that link again, or even the Dressings e-cookbook, either way you'll get on our list for all of the future recipes. Thank you all so much. Happy Valentine's Day. So next week we're going to do mini cheesecakes. And I'm thinking the flavor is going to be strawberry and white chocolate. White chocolate strawberry cheesecakes. Okay? They're fantastic for kids. These little ones and the cheesecakes I've made for my nephews, and they loved them. Nephews that are pretty picky and not big plant-based, they're eating more typical treats and things. So for them to say they like these desserts is great. All right, you don't need to cook your beets before juicing. No, you don't. I'm not sure what that would even be like if you steamed the beets and then juiced them, but it's definitely possible because you're just removing all the fiber and you'll end up with the beet juice, and it would be fine. But you're not getting the power, you're not getting as much of the nutrition if you cook the beets first and then juice them. So I would definitely go with the raw beets if you can. Yes, all right. So that's it for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining, and I will see you next week for the cheesecake. Until then, have a delicious weekend. Enjoy your little raspberry fudge delights, and I thank you for being here. Bye, everyone.